So X-Men 97, we are quickly approaching the midway point of this first season. And because we haven't recorded in a little bit here, we're actually going to be reviewing episodes 4 and 5 together. So once we dive into our thoughts, especially once we get into spoilers, I just want to warn everybody listening that we're just going to talk about both episodes pretty freely here to really just dive into the conversation and talk about all the latest and the greatest with this animated series. I know that this is something we've both been enjoying for the most part over the course of the first 3 episodes, and now with these 2 new episodes, we will share our thoughts. And so let's just dive right in, man. Let's get to it with all of that out the way. What did you think about these 2 most recent episodes of X-Men 97?
So, episode 4 is a small callback to another episode in the original animated series. I think this episode is called Motendo. I think that's the name of this one. But
Motendo and Life Death.
Motendo. Yeah. But it's really about Jubilee and Roberto getting sucked into a video game. And it's kind of like a 2-parter, right? It's like 10 minutes of that and another 10 minutes of Storm and what's his name?
Forge.
Forge doing their thing, living on Storm living with Forge, trying to get her powers back. First half of the episode with Jubilee, it's fine. It feels very fillerish. You know what I mean? Like, not much technically happens. It's just kind of cool to see Motendo and some of those older characters and the homages to the X-Men arcade game, which I think I spoke about at some point, but it was really cool, I think, to see those parallels kind of go back to back in that episode. Nothing too crazy there. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't anything like the other episodes where I feel like we were moving the storyline forward in very substantial ways. This past episode was episode 5. Oh boy, we got a lot to talk about. This episode is absolutely tremendous. It's probably my favorite episode so far of the series, and I'm coming off a high of just watching it. And it is absolutely phenomenal. The writing's there, the action's there. They're moving so many things around. So much has happened in that episode. There's action, there's characters we love but hadn't seen yet up until this point. There's a ton going on. There's comic callbacks. It's really cracking in episode 5, and I absolutely love the episode. I can't wait until to get into the nitty gritty of that one. So that's kind of where I am right now. Episode 4 was fine. It felt like a filler episode, but now watching episode 5, I'm like, oh, that's why episode 4 was so chill. Like, let's do some other things real quick, tell some other stories, and episode 5 was like right back into the action, right back moving the needle. So overall, this show was still doing what it needs to do for me. In this episode, episode 5 not only showed me why people need to be watching, X-Men the animated series right now, but it also showed me that this show now might be a contender for one of the best things on television right now as we speak, at least ongoing week to week. So I hope more people are watching. But yeah, it's like that right now.
For sure. So yeah, episode 4, Motendo / Life Death Part 1. It is broken up into 2 segments, which is something that animated series historically used to do pretty frequently. That was actually pretty commonplace for animated shows to have 2 separate segments within one episode, within one 30-minute block. It doesn't happen as frequently as much anymore. And so I thought that was like a cool little callback to 80s and 90s animated series. And overall, I thought it was pretty decent. I think that the change of pace is welcome. You can't always have your foot on the gas nonstop every single episode, especially with a show like this, which we're seeing is tackling pretty heavy subject matter on a week-to-week basis. And so to do something that was a little bit more lighthearted and fun with the Motendo segment, I thought it was really cool. And I also like the experimentation that Marvel Studios continues to do with genre. Motendo was very much a cyberpunk influence sort of episode, really leaning into video games and arcade style games, all the things that were really popular in the 90s, the 16-bit pixelated video games that we used to go and really just like waste a bunch of hours playing. That was just like a nice feel good moment to visit that type of world and to have that type of aesthetic. So I love that each episode up until this point, they've kind of tackled separate and different genres. Last week was very much horror inspired, and now we're seeing something that's a little bit more cyberpunk inspired. The other segment, Life Death Part 1, I thought it was a nice continuation of Storm's story in particular, and we'll get into the details in a second. The only thing about splitting an episode into two segments is that one is going to kind of get the short end of the stick. And I felt like that the life death segment kind of got the short end of the stick. It was only about 10 minutes of the remaining episode where they kind
Mm-hmm.
of had to speed run through a lot of plot points. The only saving grace is the fact that life death will continue. I think next week's episode is actually part 2 of life death, and it will have the full 30-minute block that we've seen out of the series so far. And then episode 5, Remember It, is extraordinary. It's certainly the best episode of the series so far. I don't
Yeah.
even think it's close at this point. They do so much. What I love the most about it is that for the most part, they just focus on character and dialogue and story. Like, there is action. It comes at the tail end. The action is fantastic. But this is just a character-driven episode of people just talking to each other. And there's a lot of hurt feelings. So many hurt feelings,
Mm-hmm.
so many emotions. They really get into what makes these characters who they are, what makes them tick on a day-to-day basis, especially as it relates to all of the relationships that they have with one another. Because again, as we continue to say on a week-to-week basis, the X-Men, they're really a family. And we're seeing how sometimes those family conflicts, those family wounds can cut
Yeah.
deeper than anything else that you might experience, even if you're fighting fucking sentinels on a battlefield or you're dealing with all these extraterrestrial or multiversal threats. Like, the stuff that they're dealing with amongst each other is really the most emotional stuff. And so I thought that episode 5 was absolutely incredible. It's really the high point of this series so far. I think that they will surpass it. I get the feeling that the trajectory is just on an upward slope. So we will
Yeah.
get better episodes, hopefully, as the season continues. But they certainly delivered with this sort of mid-season point that we're at with episode 5. So I absolutely loved it. But folks, with all of that out the way, let's go ahead and officially dive into spoilers. So if you've not seen episode 4 or 5 of X-Men 97, this is your official spoiler warning. So go watch those on Disney Plus and come back and finish out the rest of our conversation. So let's, of course, start off with episode 4 in particular and just kind of talk about the broad strokes with that one. I do think that a lot of the conversation is going to mostly revolve around episode 5. But yeah, Motendo, once that kicks off, we're here celebrating Jubilee's 18th birthday. Magneto doesn't want her to have any fun. He's like, yo, what the fuck? We got things to do. She wants to go to our arcade. But the rest of the mutants, the rest of the X-Men, they can't support her in that choice. And so her and Roberto go on sort of a separate adventure. And long before they're really able to have any fun, they get pulled into this video game based on these previous adventures created by this villain Mojo. And now all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden they are in a digital world having to overcome all of these different, sort of, again, 16-bit pixelated threats that live within this video game universe created by Mojo. And so how did you feel about just that world that they created there? The fact that they just completely changed up the visual style of this show. We've seen they've mostly leaned into the animated style that came from the X-Men animated series in the 90s, but they've added in a lot of new elements as well. I know you pointed out last week that there was some, certainly some anime influence, which I think is stronger now more than ever. But in this one, they just go in a completely different direction and really lean into that cyberpunk tech aspect of the 90s. I think those, nostalgic callbacks that we're sort of used to seeing in arcade style video games. How did you feel about that world that they set up once they got going?
It's dope, man. Because the villain in this episode, Mojo, originally he was a TV guy. He was like, yeah, this the episode was like Mojo Vision, based around TV. But this being based around, I think, video games, is just as important. Again, when I think of going to the arcade, I legit think of like the X-Men. I think of a couple games. I think of X-Men. I think of Turtles, Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, the Simpsons game. I always think of the Simpsons game, like games like that. The arcade beat 'em ups, and I really love the idea of changing the art style for that, for making it look like a video game. And who better to, I think, lead an episode like this than Jubilee, the girl who, honestly, of course she's here, but she's the baby of the group. She's just here to kind of have fun, and to kind of kick it. And she kind of drags Roberto along with her, who is kind of the same now. He is the new Jubilee as the young cat. And yeah, they end up in this video game world. I really like those ideas, man. Having to switch up the art style. I wish more people took more liberties to be like, let's change up the art style this season. Because what's funny, almost every time somebody does that, people talk about it. Versus, I can just remember so many times, like, whoa, what's going on with the animation? Oh, the animation switch up. Those are usually the things that's most talked about. Even when we think about Spider-Verse, you know what I mean? We're like, what is this thing going on? So I love when people take risks and liberties to switch up the art style, and I'm glad they did that here for this episode.
Yeah, and again, it's really that love letter to the 90s. This show is continuously reminding us this is 1997. This is not modern
Hmm.
day, just in case you might have forgotten, or just because, we really dive into the characters and we're so focused on their emotional journeys, we have to remember the setting in which this takes place. And I think ultimately what I love the most about all of this up until this point is that this so distinctly feels removed from the MCU
Yeah.
as it is supposed to. It's by design where I don't get any sort of feelings or thoughts about any other MCU properties at all. I'm very much
Hmm.
invested and focused on this universe as a singular entity. And it just makes me wish that they would do more things like this in the future, because even What If, which was sort of, I don't want to say promise, but the idea behind that was that it was going to be completely disconnected. Turns out that that's not entirely the case. That feels so connected to the MCU now at this point. Now we have something that's just so totally refreshing. It's so disconnected. It really is of its own self, and of its own identity. And I think that having that opportunity and having that roadmap for the future of the MCU, especially if they want to continue to lean into that for animation, I think it's a really good strategy. Just because after the past few years of what we've experienced, this is just refreshing. It's a nice change of pace, as I said earlier. And so I love what they did here with the animation style, getting super creative, super different, super weird in all the places that make sense. Jubilee in particular, I just want to talk about her quickly. Just, again, this is focused on her, and there's a lot of fun, and there's video games, of course, but it is somewhat of a new arc for her as well. Like, she's discovering adulthood. That's really, I think, a lot of what this is about, because she just turned 18 in this episode as she celebrates her birthday. And the place that we continue to see her in is sort of, I think, being reluctant to adulthood and still holding on to that inner child that's within herself. That's partially why she's so excited to play these games. But also, she does have to grow up and become an adult, and playing somewhat of a mentorship role to Roberto. Kind of being
Hmm.
that guiding light for him as he is a new person, a part of this team, a part of this world, and also trying to figure out his parental situation and how he's ever going to handle that. What do you think about just like the path that she's on so far? We got a little bit of this from her in those first couple of episodes, but now they're really, I think, putting the spotlight on her and showcasing her in the way as she is the younger, she's one of the younger members of the group, and now she has to sort of navigate what that looks like and how she's gonna, I guess, create the next few years of her life as she enters adulthood.
Yeah, I think it's a very important message going on with Jubilee. Magneto's like, we got to get to work. Jubilee's like, It's my birthday. I'm trying to have fun," which I think both are kind of right. And the thing is, what this episode does is it kind of sets up Jubilee in her story. It really is telling us, or telling Jubilee, that she might have to grow up faster than she wants to, and that's unfortunately kind of the role of somebody in the X-Men. She's not always going to be able to be the 18-year-old Jubilee and be similar to other 18-year-olds. That's something I think X-Men Evolution did really well. It was like, these X-Men are young. Y'all may be high schoolers, but y'all kind of different. Like, you're not going to be able to always just be this normal teenager. And I think Jubilee's kind of going through that exact thing right now. And that's what the story arc is setting up. That's what they're trying to show us, is like, Jubilee is she's about to somewhat leave her childhood again very early. 18, you're still a baby, but you got to grow up. And I think it is going to take her and Roberto in particular, to get in some danger, to get into some things that they might not want to get into, to really understand, like, yeah, I'm gonna have to grow up faster than a lot of other people. So yeah, I think it's a really good storyline they're going down with Jubilee.
Yeah, and for a lot of these mutants, they have aged, since we've last seen them, and throughout the course of the show. But Jubilee still retains that youthfulness that I think is so important, because this is still a school that they're supposed to be in Xavier's
Hmm.
mansion. Like, that's still kind of the premise of mutants and X-Men who come through that school. And we don't have too many other characters right now occupying the position of, hey, I just discovered my powers. I'm a teenager. Now I have to like learn to live with them. I have to learn how to control them, and then how to navigate the real world. It's mostly the more adult oriented X-Men that we've been focusing on, like Magneto, Jean, Scott, Logan, of course. But her having that perspective along with Roberto now, it's so crucial, just because mutants are always going to be mutants. That's not something that necessarily goes away. This is something that they have to live with, and it's going to change and fluctuate throughout their lives in terms of how the world reacts to them and how they react to the events of the world. And so I think that it's a really crucial point of view to have all throughout the show, to just remember, like, yeah, she's 18, so her being reluctant to grow up is totally normal. That's where a lot of people fall at that particular age. You do want some sense of independence to be able to make those decisions that you want to, but you don't want all the responsibility that comes with adulthood. And then on top of that, you add these extraordinary responsibilities and powers that they all individually have to deal with. That just makes it
Mhm.
so much more stressful, for their individual lives. And so I just love that they continue to focus on that, and they continue to call back to that. Let's move on to the second half, Life Death Part 1. This refocuses us on Storm and where she is with her journey right now, and we see that she actually goes back with Forge, who we saw pop up in episode 3, at the end of episode 3, essentially telling her, I'm going to help you restore your powers after they've been taken away from you. They try to undergo a couple of procedures. They don't really work, but we're seeing this relationship and this romance develop between these two. That's really kind of the focus on just like them growing close together. But very quickly, we find out that Forge is actually, he has an ulterior motive. He's actually working with the government to develop these mutant collars that takes away from their powers, and that pisses Storm off, obviously, because she thought that he was there to help her, but it turns out he's doing sort of covert government work. And so before their relationship can ever really go anywhere, it's already over, just because he is doing some really slick shit to her, and she trusted him, and she thought that they had something a little bit more there. So this whole segment went by really, really quickly. They just kind of touched on these beats really fast, but it does kind of put Storm in a pickle, because she still doesn't have her powers, but she also comes into contact with a demon by the end of it, and a villain
Mhm.
that she's going to have to overcome, which I assume is going to be, sort of the primary focus of Life Death Part 2. So what did you think about this? Just seeing their relationship grow, but then quickly just all of a sudden take 10 steps backwards, and now Storm is kind of worse off than what she was before.
Yeah, what a tricky situation to be in, and it also makes sense for Storm's character to have to go through some shit in order to get her powers back. A lot of this is unfortunate, but I think the idea of just her being able to attach to someone, that's something that she doesn't really have right now. Again, because she did lose her powers, is like, all right, nobody can really relate to me right now, unfortunately, because this hasn't happened to a ton of people. And so here I am in the wilderness, and it's now Forge who is attempting to put Storm back on the path. But what a crazy situation where now it's like, is it Forge's love for Storm that really, is him trying to get her powers back, or is it guilt on Forge's part, now realizing that Forge helped make mutant dampeners? You know what I mean? Like, that's a hard thing, I think, to weigh from Storm's point of view, in order for all this to happen. But I really like, kind of, I think the awkwardness that it creates between the two, especially, again, I think it's really cool from a cultural standpoint, where we get this Native American guy. I'm pretty sure in the comics he was particular, I think Cheyenne. I think he was a Cheyenne Indian. And then you get Storm, man, who's supposedly supposed to be this African goddess. You know what I'm saying? That's not necessarily a dynamic we see too often. It's two different people from two separate worlds that are now a part of one world, just due to being mutants. So I just really love that concept. I really love those ideas. But yeah, now they have, what's his name, the adversary, on deck, big ass owl looking dude. And I'm interested, man. I'm ready to see what goes down, because he's really cool. He's also kind of creepy. There's some horror, and at the end of that episode too, I was like, oh, what's going on with this guy? But yeah, I'm excited to see how it goes down, and to see where the adversary takes us, into Life Death Part 2.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, for her to get her powers back this quickly would have just been too easy. This is clearly a season-long journey that she's going to go on, and so this is just kind of the first huge roadblock on the path of her recovering her powers, and so she's going to have to figure out another way. But I thought it was a nice touch. Again, it moved really, really quickly, so you don't get a ton of time to just truly, I think, understand this relationship that exists between these two, this romantic relationship that was developing. But it served its purpose. Kind of got her to the next spot in the position that she needs to be in order to be ready to gain her powers back and go through whatever trials and tribulations that she will have to. But with that said, let's move on to episode 5, Remember It, because there really is a lot to talk about in this episode. I think overall, this might be some of the most sophisticated writing that we've seen out of the
Yes.
series so far.
Yes.
The writers behind this particular episode, they were going really crazy. They dove all the way into what makes these characters who they are, and also just the essence of them, yeah, and sort of the struggles that they're all internally dealing with. And it remarkably, I think, gave everybody a moment, which is really tough to do. And this episode was the longest one so far. It was 36 minutes, but that's still not a ton of time. But everybody, it felt like, got a moment. Everybody felt like they went to another level that they weren't previously at before. They took the next step in the journey that we're seeing them on. And most notably, sort of the setting of this episode is the fact that Genosha is now admitted into the United Nations as an official nation, and that's the mutant nation. And so many of the mutants are able to go to Genosha and be able to celebrate this new accomplishment, this new acknowledgement that they're now getting from the UN. But as a part of that, the council, the Genosian Council, they want to make Magneto the leader of the country, but basically for him to do so, for him to willing to be the leader of this country, he wants Rogue, who is this romantic partner that he's had, to be his queen. That is the only condition that he has, because they want somebody that's strong and, sort of similar to Charles's ideology, but, can still be a leader and be a great face and have this very, very passionate point of view for mutants. But he's not trying to do it unless he can bring Rogue along with him. And so this is now continuing the thread from the first episode, or the second episode, excuse me, in which we saw that there was something between these two. And then he spills that information to Rogue, and she's like, dude, what the fuck? I'm not trying to do that. I don't want to be a queen of a nation. Is this what you were up to all along? And we kind of see them quickly lose a lot of the spark that we thought might have been there, because they just cannot be on the same page. He's asking a lot of her that she's not willing to live up to, and she's also wrestling with this own love triangle that she's dealing with between her and Gambit, which I do want to talk about him separately in a second. But it's a lot to deal with in the first moments of this episode, just seeing this relationship develop under the pretense that now they have to be kind of this king and queen of a nation and have all this new responsibility that she certainly didn't sign up for. So how did you feel about that sort of scene setter for this episode? This all taking place in Genosha, this really important event happening for that country. But then, Magneto now is the leader of the X-Men, trying to bring Rogue along with him. They are now at odds with each other because they don't see this the same way.
Yeah, so this whole scene is very familiar to every recent comic reader who's gone down the Power of X, House of X storyline, where once they established the nation of Krakoa, all the mutants from different walks of life have to come together and be like, all right, y'all, who are our leaders gonna be? And that's exactly what this is. And they're like, Charles ain't around, dog. Like, nobody else has really been seen that much but you. And it's crazy because Magneto has absolutely kind of been a terrorist to the United States in particular, if not different parts of the world. So, but they still have to, scrape by that and say, Magneto, you gotta, sorry, dude, like it's really you that needs to step up in this moment. In the comic run, I think they have a little bit more people that are kind of on the line that they can look through, but here it's like everything is pointing to Magneto. And what a crazy thing to have to, for Rogue to have to, somewhat take on this new mantle to try to be this queen. Because I don't think she's ever maybe thought of herself in that way. She's always just she just want to touch somebody, bro. That's all she wants. Like, she don't want to be no queen. She barely be wanting to fight people half the time. She's like, can I just touch somebody? That's all she wants to do.
Real simple desires, for sure.
Real simple. And so to have to do this is just a big ask of her. But really these past two episodes, there's so much love going on in triangles, and it is really cracking in the in the world of love of X-Men. But after Magneto asked Rogue, to be his queen, she's like, well, maybe it is time for me to step up. And I think it's so interesting. I wonder if Magneto and Rogue don't have that love connection. Who does he ask? Like, does he ask anybody? Does he ask at all? Is Rogue even, in contention if they don't have this previous love connection back in the day? And so, yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic going on. But I think it's really cool that they had to bring this council together with all of these people, the Callisto of the Morlocks, and you got Emma, and you got Shaw. It's just really crazy to see everybody in one room trying to figure out who the leader of Genosha is going to be. But yeah, it's cool stuff, man.
Yeah, on one hand, Magneto is really trying to live up to the desires and the wishes of Charles, his best friend. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
actively trying to walk this path of doing what's right. And kind of doing what's right at this moment is having a strong leader be at the forefront of Genosha now that they have this new responsibility and this new placement within the United Nations. That you have to have a really strong foundation for something that is so impactful for all mutants. You can't come with the shitty term with the shitty king kicking all this thing
Mm-hmm.
off. You need somebody that's going to really kind of rule and have a strong vision and be able to take them into the future, into the next generation. And so his mind is like, yeah, I'll do it, but I need somebody alongside me. I need help because I think a part of him, like he obviously has those feelings for Rogue, and it's a little selfish to ask that of her. It's
Yeah,
definitely
for
it's
sure.
definitely it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely ego driven to ask her to do something like that. But I think he's also somewhat doubtful that he can do it alone. I do think that he's wrestling
Mm-hmm.
with this idea and this thought that I'm not Charles. Like, yes, we did agree on a couple of things, but we do see this and the destiny of mutants very differently. And maybe I'll fail. Maybe I don't have the patience, or maybe I haven't grown to the levels that I think I have to be able to lead this nation in the future. Rogue can really hold me down and keep me on a straight and narrow path.
Mm-hmm.
But that at the end of the day, that's not necessarily the right thing to do, to ask that of her and to also place her in that position to make that choice, which is going to change everything about her life. And not only that, she's still dealing with everything with Gambit as well, who also is not fucking with that idea of like, wait, he wants you to do what? And we got this thing going on too. Like, what's going on with you right now? So it's really, I think, an empathetic position for her in particular to think
Mm-hmm.
about just like all the stuff that she has to wrestle with and mentally just process throughout this whole thing. And so it creates really complex and challenging layers for her character, especially by the end of this episode, where we basically see both of them sacrifice themselves for her and for the betterment of mutant kind. But I think ultimately it's tough. It's really tough that she's now all of a sudden having to deal with the emotions of two separate men, but then also to, like, I guess, just make sense of it all. Make sense of the love that she has for both of them, and also the love that they have for her, and how she's going to be able to
Mm-hmm.
grapple with this whole thing. But speaking of that, it continues on. The other part of this triangle, the other point of it is Gambit, who I think now has sort of reached his wits end with where this whole relationship is. He's sat back, he's watched, he understands and
Yeah.
knows what Rogue and Magneto have, and I think now he's just like, I can't do this. I just really can't be a part of this. And I think what's really important about this episode is that they give a whole flashback of how Rogue and Magneto came to be, how their relationship
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sprouted, which was really useful to have, because when we saw them interact in that second episode, we talked about it. It was like, yo, where was this in the animated
Yeah, they
series? Like,
gaslit us.
they
Yeah,
definitely just like
that didn't
inserted
happen.
this. And so we needed this background information, and we saw that they basically hit it off very early, and just throughout the entire run of the animated series, we're left to believe that they just kind of ignored each other and they avoided it altogether. They didn't talk about this relationship that they had. And so Gambit has to receive and process this information, and then also he has to wrestle with the information of her being asked to be the queen of Genosha. And I think ultimately, he comes to a place and a position by the end of it where he's just like, you know what, we're just gonna have to be friends, because we can't figure this out. She wants to touch him and feel him. That obviously can't happen, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it's so much to wrestle with on his end too, and from his perspective. So how did you think about Gambit and just like all the emotional stuff that he had to process and take in as she was telling him all this new information?
Oh man, you said it. He's just kind of, I think, fed up with the in betweenness that Rogue is going through right now. Since day one, Gambit has always been there for Rogue. It's never been wishy washy. Gambit's never been like out looking at other girls for real. You know what I'm saying? It's always been Rogue, and he's always seen past the touching aspects, and that's something that Rogue can't get past. And that's what makes this episode so good, really the show so good in general, is nuance. Everything is so complicated, and they're so good at communicating that. And what they communicate here for Rogue's character is like, there are things in both Magneto and Gambit that she needs, and unfortunately, it doesn't exist in one person. And Gambit there that has the love, and has everything except for the touch. Magneto has the touch, and she's wrestling with those things. And I think Gambit sees that, and unfortunately for Rogue, is like, I can't do that anymore. I can't be here just when you want the emotional aspects of love, right? I can't be here for just that anymore if you're not going to be all in. And so I don't blame them. We seen what was that, episode 1, episode 2 I think it was, where Gambit was just like, he had the Queen of Hearts in his hand, seeing Magneto and Rogue hitting it off, and he had to pick Queen of Hearts down, bro. Like, you can see it bubbling for a little bit that Gambit was kind of over this thing. Even throughout this entire episode, it's just like, yeah, Gambit's not having this anymore. And so I get it, man. I get where he's coming from, but it's really interesting to see both of them, I think, have to go down this path. But I know Gambit this whole time, man, he's just been so heartbroken, because that's really, every time you see him, that's all he can think about or do is be like, dang, I think I'm losing Rogue. It's sad.
And I really love by the end of it, when they finish off this conversation, he just kind of gives a big fuck you to Magneto. Like, you know what? We're going to be friends, but I'll be here when inevitably he's going to break your heart. Like, I'll
Yep.
still be here. I'm still going to be the one in your corner, as I've always been, because
Yeah.
that's not going to work out between you two. It's inevitable that it's destined to fail at this point, which is, kind of ominous considering the end of this episode and just where events led us to by the end of it. But it's interesting because he is definitely, I think, more of the steady pillar in her life, but he cannot provide her with that one thing that is so important to her, and understandably so. But at what cost is she willing
Right.
to lose somebody within her life in order to have something else? And then, one of the big things that happened at the Genosha sort of celebration, they're at these festivities celebrating. I mean, she pops up in this red dress looking like a fucking 10, and her and Magneto share a dance. It's super romantic, and I'm watching it thinking like, oh, it's over. It's about to
It's
be these
over.
two forever. Like they have gotten there, because this is everything we wanted to see. She clearly loves him, vice versa. We got the history in the background. But then by the end of it, I think she has a quick realization, like, you know what? Actually, this can't be. This is not right. This is not what I want. This is not for me. And this is a mistake. And she walks away from Magneto in that moment. How did you feel about seeing her walk in, sort of sweep up the entire place, looking just amazing, taking him off of his feet, having this really romantic dance with each other, only to realize that this just isn't the path for her. This is not going to be a thing between her and Magneto.
Man, she came in crazy. Okay, this is definitely remnant of like a Hellfire Gala. You know what I'm saying? Like, all the X-Men are in their best, and the girl with the red dress comes in. You know what I mean? We've seen the story time and time again. It's like, who is that? And I think, it was just really cool to see Rogue, I think, make an entrance like that. One thing, again, I love talking about with the X-Men is they usually almost always got that shit on. And I really love what they're doing in this show when it comes to fashion as well. Everybody just looks so good. All the outfits are blazing and dazzling. Like, it's really good work, I think, they're doing on that end as well. But yeah, to see Rogue come in and to see her and Magneto share this moment is like, yeah, this is, and what's crazy is when I was watching, I was like, this was fast. Like, when you talking to Gambit 5 minutes ago, and now y'all kissing in the middle of the dance floor. Like, the dance is one thing, and putting on, a show is another thing. But the kiss was like, oh, what? Wait a second, they really doing this thing pretty fast. They're making this king and queen thing happen very quickly. And so yeah, it was just a wild thing to watch, man.
The emotions are running really, really high. I mean, the sexual tension it's pretty palpable in this room. Like, everybody
It
is
is.
acting off of super strong emotions and a very, very emotional time for everybody. And so when she showed up, I mean, Magneto, I mean, what do you expect him to do? Like, that man was probably head over heels once he saw her in that moment, but it did not end the way that I think he thought it would. But there's trouble in paradise in another relationship as well, because we catch up with Jean and Cyclops, who were not on the best of terms themselves, because they have come off of a pretty traumatic incident, as we talked about in the most recent episode, finding out that the Jean that he thought was Jean was not Jean at all. It was Madeline Pryor, and the real Jean, has now come back into his life, and he has a kid with Madeline Pryor. It's just so much that they now have to contend with and deal with. And they're having a conversation, and they've grown distant because it just feels weird and awkward, as you would expect it would, and they just can't they can't kind of reconcile everything that's happened. They're still kind of processing what's going on. But what just made it worse is the fact that Jean finds out that Cyclops has been communicating telepathically with Madeline for a long time now. He says for at least a month. He's been checking up on her and keeping up with her movements, even though she's gone to a completely another country. And so, obviously, as you would expect, this pisses Jean off. Like, what are you doing? Why are you checking up on this woman? It's not me. And he's just trying to explain to her, like, I got a child with her. Like, what do you expect me to do? And she asks him, do you love her? And he's like, I love you both. And so that just makes it even more messy. It's just crazy. It gets really, really weird and awkward super fast. What did you think about that whole thing popping off? And I guess the more important question is, by him communicating telepathically with Madeline, do you consider that to be an act of cheating on Jean? The fact that he was still keeping up with this woman's movements, even though that's not the woman he's supposed to be with. Do you think that was him cheating?
So if he was just like, I'm literally just checking on her, and then that was it. Like, I mean, she is the mother of his child. I understand that, right? Like, making sure she's okay. She did just kind of leave. And technically they were together for years with an S.
Years and years, yep.
Actual years, and he thought she was Jean. If he was just doing that, checking on her, make sure it's okay, no, it's not cheating. But to find them kissing telepathically, I think he definitely crossed the line. I think that's definitely cheating. It's
that's so wild.
Yeah,
I can't kiss you physically, but we got these powers. Let's just make this shit happen across countries telepathically. Like that's a solution.
And for Jean to kick down the doors is so funny. I was like, what is going on? Because I was like, oh, was that Jean? They got me for sure. They was pulling tricks all over the place. But for that to go down like that is just insane. Whoever wrote that, y'all crazy. Y'all are crazy.
It's some real Days of Our Lives type shit for real.
Hey, telepathic cheating is different. Yeah, no, it was definitely some soap opera stuff. This is Young and the Restless for sure. It's wild out here. But yeah, man, that all of that is really wild. I mean, can you? Yeah, Cyclops is in a crazy place right now, bro. That's all I can say. That's all I can say. That dude is going through it.
Yeah, it's hard to defend him when you do see that there's like a physical thing happening, even though it's like technically not physical, but mentally it's physical. Like that, you can't really defend that. They gotta really have a conversation because like that's his baby mom's, but also that's not his woman, that's not his lady, but she has to be there because like, come on, y'all got a child together, so they got to sit down and really hash this out and figure out how they're gonna deal with this situation. I mean, regular human beings have to do it all the time. You know, people have to co-parent and then they get new partners and now all of a sudden it becomes a growing family. So I think it is heading there, but this is the very, very big rock in the way of the pathway to success, of the pathway to happiness for any of them. And also their son is still in peril. You know, Nathan is still off dealing with this technovirus, and so they're not entirely sure if he's safe and if he's going to be okay. So that just adds on to the emotions of the whole situation. But Scott was a little loose and messy with this whole thing. I think he definitely had to move a little bit different. But, you know, once they got into their arguments and they were going back and forth, I mean, again, the writing, they were just dropping bars on each other. Jean looked at Scott and she said, yeah, the music's changing and you just need a chair. And he says back to her,
crazy.
Yeah, right, exactly. And he says back to her, do you love me, Jean, or am I just a lovely memory? And I'm just like,
oh my God.
Oh, y'all are going in right now. Like, what the fuck? Y'all are making me feel something. Y'all are making me look inward thinking about all these relationships that I've had in my life. Because this script writing is just crazy right now because they're really getting to it. Like, do we love each other, or has this just been something that has kind of been a lie? You know, and Jean is also like, yo, Mr. Sinister, like, placed fake memories inside of me. He made a clone of me. Like, he did all these really sadistic things to me. Have some empathy, Scott. Think about me as well. Like, yes, you have this child and you thought it was me, but like, look at where I've been for these past few years. I have to figure out my place in this world now. So it gets so messy and so complicated so quickly. And that's after we've seen everything with Magneto and Gammon and Rogue. And I'm just like, yo, this is truly soap opera territory. We're just dealing with nothing but broken emotions and hurt feelings at this point. That's this whole episode. I mean, it's 1997, but you need a damn Drake soundtrack behind it because that's where we're at right now. It's kind of crazy. But as we get towards the end of this episode, some shit hits the fan for sure. It goes really, really left. Cable arrives at the celebration on Genosha out of nowhere. I was not expecting this, but he arrives and he tries to warn the X-Men that there's going to be an impending attack really soon here, and he's specifically talking to Jean, but he gets sent back to the future before he can really get off the message and communicate what's happening here. And ultimately, we see that Jean realizes that Cable is like the adult version of her son. It's an adult version of Nathan at this point. She's looking at her son who's come from the future. And before things are really able to be processed and communicated to others, we see this attack come and everything, just all hell breaks loose. Master Mold is returned and he has an even more gigantic new body, this new armor, and he comes and just leads Sentinels to attacking the Genosha headquarters and where this gala is taking place. And we get this big action sequence, you know, that happens in the final moments of this episode, where essentially Magneto and Gambit work together to take out Master Mold and to try to combat this attack. And by the end of it, we see that they have, you know, kind of separately sacrificed themselves. They presumably have died. I mean, I think Magneto is the less likely one because we don't really see the fate of where he ends up. Like he uses his electromagnetic powers to create this really massive explosion to send back the forces of the Sentinels. But I think Gambit's fate feels a lot more definitive because by the end of the episode, Rogue grabs him and she says, I can't feel you. I can't feel you. And that's just like the craziest thing because she can touch him and nothing's happening. For the first time, she can actually physically touch him and we don't see anything happen because his body is essentially lifeless at this point. So a lot to tackle there, a lot to talk about there. It's a really big sequence to conclude the episode. But what were your overall thoughts on just how everything wrapped up?
Wow. I have to throw something in real quick before I go to the end. The audacity of Jean after kissing Logan is crazy. Okay, I had to say that.
Forgot about that. That also did happen. Yeah.
That is nuts for you to come at him just because he didn't see you. They both were kind of wilding. That's almost.
He had to tell her about herself. He was like, no, this isn't a thing. Go back to your fucking Boy Scout. You know, he called Scott an overgrown Boy Scout, which I thought was the funniest shit in the world. But he had to tell her about herself in that moment.
No, absolutely, man. But man, Cable. Wow, something I've always wanted to happen, and it could have happened in the comics, and I just never seen it or never knew, was to see either Cyclops or Madeline Pryor recognize Cable. That almost like I've always waited on that moment, and it finally happens in a fucking crisis. Like all hell is breaking loose, and that's when it happens. I'm like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? But boy, oh boy, these Sentinels pulling up is crazy. Like they almost don't even feel like normal Sentinels. They feel like they're even on more crack than the previous Sentinels. You know what I'm saying? Like, you telling me the whole nation of Genosha is getting demolished by these Sentinels? Like you said, Master Mold pulls up. It's a lot going on. I also like how they do something very small, but they like when Gambit is like trying to save people, he makes it sound like they kind of like already been fighting for a little bit. You know what I mean? Like they skip a little bit of time and he's like, oh no, we've been trying, you know what I mean, to kill him. It was like, oh shoot, when y'all do that? So I kind of like how they skipped a little time there. Like you didn't have to necessarily see that whole fight, but you knew that they had been fighting for a little bit in this thing. I thought that was really cool and really well done. But it's crazy, man. You got Callisto who looks dead. Her eye is open. Mm-hmm. Callisto's eye is open. I'm like, Callisto, I think feels dead. Sebastian Shaw looked like he was dead sitting up there. These are very important X-Men, y'all. Callisto, the leader of the Morlocks, Sebastian Shaw, the Hellfire. I'm just like, y'all are killing some important people. Like, what is going on here? So it's a very heavy episode in that way, man. But Gambit, and Magneto. I don't even know like where to begin or where to start. From Rogue's point of view, holy shit. Oh man, you thought y'all knew loss? I mean, right in front of her face, she just lost her two men. She lost both in the same like 5-minute span, bro. Like I don't even know what to tell you on that front. That shit is actually insane. But everything they both went out so valiantly and so strong. It was like just really cool to see. Start with Magneto, man, where he is guarding the Morlocks. We got to remember, like, Magneto just got the Morlocks to Genosha. He just brought them there, and he told them to come with him, and they would always be safe. Guess who he has to protect now in this moment from death. The people who he told to come. You know how guilty you have to feel in that moment. Like, damn, they only here because of me. And now I have literally we're going through the Sentinel beam. Oh man, it's some powerful stuff, man. Like it's really deep. And then Gambit just going all over the city. He's saving everybody. He's saving Morlocks. He's saving the Hellfire people. It don't even matter. Gambit is legit doing the thing, and something that Gambit's kind of always, I don't know if suffered is the word. Yeah, maybe suffered, but Gambit has never been seen as like the strongest in the group, right? Like I've never seen anybody be like, oh, Gambit will whoop ass of all these people. This episode, you better put some respect on my boy's name, because he was going in, killing multiple Sentinels across the way. Him and Rogue were going in, man. But yeah, it's just crazy. I think for Rogue to have to see both of her guys kind of perish in this way so quickly. But yeah, wow, what a position to be in.
Yeah, they really saved all the action beats for these final few minutes. I mean, there was no action prior to this. It was just dialogue and conversations, which I thought was brilliant because, and, really seeing this brutal action take place at the end of the episode after we just witnessed all of these heavy emotions, I think it just made that all the more impactful. It made just all of these moments really hit different once you just see all this tumultuous stuff that they're going through, just to ultimately see these two people that are so close to Rogue in particular seemingly perish, and now she has to deal with that and contend with that as she moves forward. So it was just a really, really crazy way to end the episode. And also visually, I just want to point out too that I love the way that this whole action sequence looked. It felt like, it feels like that the creators behind the show, Bo DeMayo, probably more people on his team, it feels like that they really love anime, because it just felt like that there were several sequences that call back to just like some of those shots you would see in anime. And I think that there were a lot of close-ups and some of the way that the running was communicated, or just like the action in general, just the style that we're seeing utilized here feels like a very loving tribute to anime art styles. And so I'm just loving that they're, constantly, as we said earlier with Motendo, they're including these other art styles. They're really pushing themselves and pushing the boundaries of what they can do here, just because, again, now in 2024, have more resources at our disposal that just weren't available in the mid 90s. And so it's just really, really great to see all of that come to fruition. I guess as we wrap up here, do you have any thoughts on Nightcrawler in this episode? He also popped up here, had a couple of good moments. Thank God he survived. He definitely seemed like he was in danger at the end with the attack, but he walked out on the other end and survived. But any thoughts on Nightcrawler and just what he did in this episode?
Oh, I'm just happy to see him. Literally been one of my favorite X-Men since forever. Like, I really can't remember. Like, when I play the arcade game, with Dazzler and Colossus, I use Nightcrawler. I always use Nightcrawler. It just has always been me. But yeah, I'm just happy to see him. I think he'll become a major player now that he's introduced and all this has gone down. It seems like he has a new role now potentially within X-Men. So excited to see where he goes, man. I love Kurt Wagner. I love the accent. Everything is just like, he got the fit on. I'm just really happy to see him, and it feels really good to have him here. But yeah, I'm happy he survived too. Kinda. He's unconscious, but I think he's alive. I think he's alive.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like he'll definitely be back, and I think that they know a lot of people love Nightcrawler and they want to see him more. So they're not afraid to knock some people off the board, but he feels like one that'll stick around. But yeah, we're getting a lot of mutants every episode, just like coming back, returning, being included again. As you mentioned, a lot of the Hellfire Club popped up in Frost, and Moira McTaggart was in there as well, and also Cable popping up, towards the end of this episode. I'm just wondering where these things come, where they align, later in the season, how we'll see either some of these people or all of these people, the ones that survived at least, may or may not play a role or a factor. Any thoughts on just Cable's role and position? Because we know that Bishop went to some future with a young Nathan to try to figure out how to combat this technovirus, but now we're seeing this older version of Cable come back, but he's being transported across universes. And he also, like, before he gets sent back to the future, I think he said, like, oh, not again, or not yet, or something like that. Like, he's been through this multiple times and he hasn't figured out how to just relay this information successfully. And so I'm wondering if maybe like we get to a future episode where he comes back in enough time, warns them of the impending attack, and they can prevent all of
Mhm.
this from happening. And maybe Gambit is able to survive. Maybe that's how they bring back Magneto. Any thoughts on just like Cable and where we might see him in the future?
I think that's everything you said is exactly what's going to happen. The way just him and Madeline's interaction, it clearly seems like he was trying to stop whatever was going down here on Genosha. And so I think that's exactly where we'll see sometime in a future episode is Cable, is him him trying to save all the events that go down here, because there were so many deaths, and I just can't imagine. I understand having some loss, right, in TV shows, but we lost so many people. It's just like, I don't know. Like Banshee, bro, Banshee got blasted in the middle. That was crazy.
Yeah.
Like Banshee got deleted. I just could not believe they made it look like that. But to lose both Magneto and Gambit, and I mean Madeline is also unconscious at the end of this episode too, I think. It's just like, no, we can't have this. So I definitely think they're gonna go back in time and try to save some people. I don't know who, I don't know if everybody, but I think there's a reason it's called Remember It. You know what I mean? Like Gambit can't go out like that. And so yeah, I think they'll try to get some of those people back.
Yeah, I mean, they got to have future seasons here. We got to come back and keep some of these characters around at this point because we're losing a lot of people off the chessboard. So yeah, I think that's going to be the case. But yeah, man, I guess as we wrap up, any other final thoughts or any other observations from either two episodes, episode 4 or 5, that you wanted to call out? I think the only other thing that I had to mention, that scene earlier in episode 5 where Scott is talking to the broadcaster and just goes the fuck off just about mutants and their relationship to humans. I mean, he was pissed. He was angry. It was just like, yeah, we don't deserve to work with you. Like, we shouldn't coexist. Like, this shouldn't be a thing anymore. Like, you need us. I mean, he just let loose. Like, we haven't really seen him be out of character like that. I don't know if ever in this context. So it was a little bit of a different shade to him, considering like just the type of character he is. But that was kind of the only other big thing that stood out to me throughout the course of these 2 episodes.
Yeah, I think getting Cyclops out of character is so interesting, but for him to snap like that makes so much sense, because technically, in terms of X-Men and him being the leader for this long, he really is one of the guys that has the most weight on their shoulders. Like Professor X went out there in the field, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of been Cyclops out there leading these people in the field. So eventually, he's like, I did all this shit for y'all. You know what I'm saying? Eventually, he just kind of snapped, and I understand. But what's really crazy about that moment is, again, that whole broadcast. Even as the news lady says, she's like, "We're doing this to make mutants seem like they're normal people," and he's like, "Yeah, no, we not though." You know what I mean? Like, and it's so interesting because that makes sense. But at the same time, he can't tell her that his baby mama was a clone of the woman that they think is, you know what I'm saying? Like, they think they together. So she's like, "Oh, what about you guys as a couple?" And he's like, "Well, I don't really know about all that." So I think that's a very, very interesting stuff going on there. Man, other details in the episode. Shout out to Dazzler. It was really cool seeing her. I think people are looking for Dazzler in live action to be Taylor Swift still. I don't know if that's really a thing or still a thing, but those who don't know, she can turn sound into kind of Jubilee. She literally makes sound and then becomes Jubilee kind of, and makes like fireworks with her powers. And so yeah, I don't know if she'll pop up, but it was cool seeing her as one of the other more well-known X-Men that we don't see. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of X-Men that we know that we never see. Dazzler's one of them, and I'd say Colossus is one of, we never see Colossus a lot. And another big one, another one of my favorite X-Men, Iceman. We never see Iceman. Like, I don't know where this dude is. Like, whatever. This dude needs to pull up. But yeah, it was just really cool seeing all those X-Men. Multiple Man was there, Exodus was there, Pixie was there. It was just really dope seeing all those people. And last thing I'll say is the statues on Genosha of Xavier and Magneto is so interesting. Again, I have to say, y'all, if you have not read House of X, Power of X run, they're like borrowing off of each other. Like Power of X, House of X definitely took some stuff from the fall of Genosha and all of that stuff. But also, this is also kind of slightly borrowing from the new House of X and Power of X ideas of what it looks like when X-Men has their own nation of Krakoa and all of that, and the love triangles, and it's crazy. So if you haven't done that, please check those out. But yeah, that's all I got.
No doubt about it. Well, folks, those are all of our thoughts on episodes 4 and 5 of X-Men 97. If you've checked these out on Disney Plus, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.